A long campaign is now.
This is the car market in Mogadishu.
NATO's military success against
many Western nations.
This is on assignment.
Hello again from Washington, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Alex Villarreal, and he is back, Imran Siddiqui, ready for another show.
Thank you so much, Alex. In this episode, we go first to Egypt, where questions are swirling after a landslide presidential victory.
Then it's on to elections in the U.S. VOA's national correspondent tells us about a shakeup in the races.
Afghanistan on the front lines. That's the subject of a gritty new documentary.
And alpacas come to America.
We're on the air and online and on the way with On Assignment.
Former Egyptian Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Sisi won a sweeping victory in his presidential bid against Hamdin Sabahi in May, but the vote is raising questions.
Egypt's election commission says Mr. Sisi took nearly 97% of the vote, with voter turnout at just 47%. So what does this say about Egypt's political climate? On Assignment's Doug Bernard spoke with VOA's Elizabeth Arrett in Cairo.
There's been no element of surprise in terms of the result. Everyone saw this coming for almost a year now since the overthrow of Morsi. So we haven't seen very big demonstrations either in favor of him or opposed to him. I mean, part of the problem, too, is because this is very much, in the opponent's point of view, a return to the past. There really aren't that many avenues now for protest. So it's been very calm.
How do people feel? I mean, are they happy? Are they blasé? Are they cynical? What's the mood?
It's very mixed, as Egypt has been very divided over the last year and before that even. But what you're seeing, from the opponents is a sense of resignation that's gone back to Egypt's sort of long-standing tradition of a man from the military in a sort of an oppressive, heavy-handed state. For other people, for his supporters, who apparently there are less of them than people had thought, they're quite happy in that they think that maybe he'll be able to sort of rein in some of the chaos that we've seen since the revolution.
Even his supporters acknowledge popular resentment.
I thought, I love this man. Why not get a picture of him? So I got it, but every time I go up in a building, I come back to find the picture shredded.
Syed, who prepares and delivers the popular dish kosheri on the streets of Cairo, remains a fan of the man he credits with keeping the revolution of 2011 on track. This despite Sisi's similarities to fellow military leader Hosni Mubarak, the target of that uprising.
Elizabeth, what are the challenges of being a journalist covering an election where you know the results before the ballots have even been printed?
Well, it does make it easier to sort of anticipate what your lead's going to be. But actually, this wasn't without surprises. The biggest thing was, even though everybody knew that Sisi would win, would be how many people would come out to vote. And I think that's where the journalists and also citizen journalists were very important in this. They extended voting by an extra day, they declared a holiday, they threatened non-voters with fines, and then they came up with, there was a number of 47% of voter turnout. It does not jive, that official number, with the reports we're getting from the field. I saw empty polling stations on the second and third day, and it seems very hard to see how that number jumped. And so sort of my observations, the observations of journalists all over the country, and again, just citizens taking, tweeting pictures of polling stations, that was an important element, I think, in seeing that Sisi doesn't necessarily have the kind of, the broad-based support that people had thought he had. So that was an interesting angle to covering this election.
It's often said that strong rulers want large electoral victories as a measure of their legitimacy. How, in any way, was this even an election, and how could anyone consider it legitimate?
Well, it certainly followed certain forms of an election. There don't seem to be, in terms of the numbers, probably of the people who voted legitimately, it probably was 90-some, 90 plus. It's the kind of numbers you saw across the Arab world before the Arab Spring. So in that sense, it's not. But it's also back to this level of political repression, and which makes people raise the question of legitimacy, of the lack of any kind of political arena for opposition.
Finally, any sense as to when some of that fear may subside and people may be a little bit more emboldened to even criticize al-Sisi?
Well, oddly enough, it may not be the political sphere, but the economic one that may bring people back out on the streets in bigger numbers. They're looking in the next couple of months at a very, very hot summer as usual, but very little, there's great power shortages. And that kind of economic hardship combined with higher prices, cuts in subsidies, that's the kind of thing that I think Sisi may be up against, or any president would have been up against in the coming months. That could be, a way of getting at sort of opening the political sphere once again, but because of economic reasons.
VOA Cairo correspondent Elizabeth Arrett. Mr. Sisi has been seen as a driving force behind a crackdown on dissent in Egypt. Just days after his inauguration, an Egyptian court sentenced 25 pro-democracy activists to 15 years in prison.
All right, we're taking a break now. When we come back, we'll go from Egyptian politics to politics here in the U.S. You're watching On Assignment.
Nearly $7 billion was spent on the 2012 U.S. presidential and congressional elections. Estimates for the 2016 presidential election are even higher after Supreme Court rulings made it easier for wealthy individuals and groups to donate more money than ever. But the 2016 race is not the only race Americans are following this year. We have the so-called midterm elections for members of Congress. And of course, joining me right now is Jim Malone to talk about this. Thank you for joining us, Jim.
You bet.
What happened? There's a serious surprise that just came out of this in the with regards to Republican primaries. What happened, and what do you think it means with regards to what just happened?
Right, we're talking about the loss of Eric Cantor, a congressman from Virginia. He's the second-ranking Republican in the House of Representatives. Look, this is huge because, first of all, congressional leaders don't lose in party primaries very often. But the shockwaves it's sending throughout the Republican Party are enormous. Cantor was open to the idea of immigration reform in some form. Now this is probably going to make a lot of Republicans leery about even going down that road. So immigration reform could be in jeopardy. It's likely Republicans will be even less interested in cooperating with President Barack Obama. And the other thing about both this election and in 2016, this sort of ongoing conflict, war between the Tea Party and the Republican Party, it's going to heat up.
Now, of course, the president is a Democrat. What does it mean for the Republicans? Do you think we'll see increasing numbers?
Well, I think Republicans are energized this year. The big concern for Democrats is their voters are not very interested in the elections. That could lead to huge Republican gains in both the House and the Senate. And remember, they control the House. What they want to do now is take over the Senate, and they have an excellent chance to do that.
Okay. A lot has been said about the increasing role of money in U.S. election. What's going on with that?
Look, we've had a number of Supreme Court decisions beginning in 2010. The most recent one this year makes it easier for people to give more and more amounts to an increasing number of candidates, political committees, political action committees. Most Americans think that this really allows the wealthy to have an exorbitant role in our politics. That's the concern. But right now, there's no way out of this in terms of legislation. The Supreme Court would likely knock it down, and Congress doesn't seem willing to address it. So for the foreseeable future, wealthy individuals, wealthy groups will continue to have an outsized role in our politics.
Would people be able to know who these wealthy individuals are?
In many cases, yes, but in some cases, no. Some of the law protects anonymous donors. Democrats in particular want to change that aspect of the law. It's unclear if they would have success in Congress.
And now talking about Hillary Clinton, she just came out with this book, and of course the book talks about her role as a Secretary of State. But do you think this is like a stepping stone towards letting people know that I'm here?
Well, letting them know that I'm here, and if they're interested in looking at 2016, I may be available. She's not definitively saying she's running. Let's be clear about that. But her book talks about her time as Secretary of State. It's a way to remind everyone of what she believes are some of her strongest achievements representing the United States around the world. And some of the toughest problems, and by the way, an opportunity to put some daylight between herself and even President Obama, say on the situation regarding Syria and the rebels, different point of view. So if you are running for president, and again, we don't know, this sets up perfectly because she gets her book out there, she's going on a tour, she's starting to build momentum now. And it's perfect because the polls show she'd be a huge favorite among Democrats. In fact, Democrats will panic if she doesn't run. And she also does very well against a number of potential Republicans right now. So it sets up well. The only question remaining to be answered, Are you running or not? We won't know that probably until early next year.
All right, let's see what happens with that. Thank you so much for your time, VOA National Correspondent Jim Malone.
You're welcome.
Moving on, we're taking a break now. When we come back, a view of the Afghan war we don't often see. You're watching On Assignment. Remember, that's the message delivered by war correspondent Mike Betcher in his gritty documentary, The Hornets Nest. It's about a deadly 9-day combat between U.S. troops and the Taliban on one of Afghanistan's most hostile terrains.
One of the messages of the film is that the long conflict in Afghanistan is a forgotten war, but the footage in this movie, shot by Betcher and his son, is as real as it gets. I discussed this with VOA film reporter Penelope Pulu.
Your measure's not found in how much time you have on this earth. It's what you do with the time that you have. These people have suffered for too long.
Penelope, tell us about the Hornets Nest and why it was that you thought it would be important to feature.
Mike Betcher is a war correspondent. His job is to go to every war front that he deems significant and document it. He's been doing that since the 70s. For him, the war in Afghanistan wasn't only an important war and had a goal, which was to really rid the Taliban. It was also a way for him to show the significance of the U.S. troop and the sacrifice that they're making.
The best way to really tell this story was not to parachute in and out. And I said, I'm just going to embed a year at a time. And so I did for over 2 years. So we could really dig down deep and get places other people could never get to.
And we're going in to check. It's been eerily quiet. We haven't had a bullet fired at us in over 12 hours.
You know, what's interesting about this also is that you're not just seeing these soldiers who are on the ground during these battles, but you also realize that the journalists telling their stories are there also. What does this say about war correspondents? How did you respond watching these films?
You would see scenes where the bullets literally pass you by. You can hear them. Soldiers are ducking and that camera is standing still. And you say, who is behind that camera? You see them ambushed 9 days straight. And at some point, you know that Betcher is there, of course, documenting every single bullet, every single death. And at some point, he turns the camera onto himself. And you wonder in the beginning, well, what is he doing that? I mean, is it self-promotion or something? Well, he told me.
Because I was pretty sure that I wasn't going to make it through, and I wanted at least a document to exist if this is where I was.
After all these experiences he's had in his life, that was it. That was the end of the road.
One of his goals for this film is not just to showcase the men who died and to remember them and to show this wartime battle as it happened, but it's also geared toward helping the living soldiers, these veterans that we have. What is his message?
Well, his message is that we need to take care of these soldiers better than we are.
These tremendously close bonds are formed of people fighting for each other's lives. And when they come back home and they leave the military, that whole support network of their buddies, their battle buddies, is gone. And that's where we fail them to make that transition from battle buddies to regular citizen living in peacetime USA.
If you top the emotional trauma with loss of limb, these people feel they have nothing to live for.
You know, this is a theme that's also touched on. The war in Afghanistan is also a theme Sebastian Junger touched on, and you had a chance to interview him. He's another American author and journalist.
One of the things said about his film in Korangal is that these soldiers describe exactly that, the feeling to stay where they are, despite the challenges, despite the war. They feel this is where they belong.
I'm on fire!
And you see the guys on edge, like, when's the next round?
I think a lot of us kind of miss that adrenaline. You do terrible things, then you have to live with them afterwards.
It messes with your head in every way.
The best thing a journalist can do, and I think maybe the only thing a journalist can do, is try to present the entire truth of an experience. The soldiers enjoyed combat to some degree. They're also very traumatized by it. Politically, those are sensitive messages to communicate, even in this country, right? But it's the truth.
What do you think will be the effect of these films?
Definitely, these two documentaries make you realize that regardless of how you feel about a war effort, these people are there to do a job they were called to do, and that they deserve more.
All right, our thanks as always to VOA's Penelope Pulu. The U.S. now plans to withdraw almost all of its forces from Afghanistan by 2016. Over 2,000 U.S. service members are reported to have died in the war, which has gone on now for more than 12 years, along with more than 13,000 Afghan police and soldiers and thousands of Afghan civilians.
It's important to remember those who have suffered, civilians who have suffered in this war, along with those who are fighting it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, moving on to our next story. You typically find alpacas, those large woolly animals related to llamas and camels in the Andean region of South America. But a growing number of farmers here in the U.S. are finding them just as charming and lucrative.
Well, VOA reporter Julie Tabo went to an alpaca farm near Washington to find out why, and she shared what she discovered with our resident animal lover on assignment's Rebecca Ward.
Gentle, inquisitive. They are cousins with the llamas. Very curious. And of course I could sniff that I had food in my hand. Just being very charming and cute.
It's shearing season at this alpaca farm in Maryland, less than an hour's drive from the nation's capital. Most of the animals don't seem to mind getting a haircut. Others, not so much. But whether they like it or not, the 130 animals on Sugarloaf Farm will have their woolly fleece sheared to keep them cool during the hot summer months. That's good for the animals and profitable for farm owner Kevin Brandt.
We're finding that there are more people in the marketplace looking for alpaca yarns because it's considered to be hypoallergenic and it's really as soft as cashmere.
So alpacas are fairly new to the United States and maybe other parts of the world. Obviously they're very popular in Peru.
Yes,
where the breed originates.
Exactly. They come from South America, mostly from Peru, and they have been coming into the United States since about 1984. And since there was a ban imposed back in the 90s, they are not importing them anymore. So the number of alpaca that are in the U.S. are growing. You have more and more independent farmers who are raising them, mostly for their fiber, but also for breeding purposes, sometimes as pets. And so you have people like Kevin who are independent businesses who are growing these alpacas, raising these alpacas for multiple reasons.
Well, you were telling me earlier that he has another job. He and his wife have another job. So he's managing with his work that he's doing and keeping the alpacas, but I mean, how lucrative is the business really?
Well, one thing that Kevin said in his company, that's the Sugarloaf Alpaca Company, you know, they support the family and they're supporting a group of team of people who are working with them, but it is not self-sustaining yet. I mean, he says this is not something that you get into to become rich. It's something that you do because it's just a certain lifestyle. If you like being out in the country and being around animals and being in the fresh air. But in terms of being self-sustaining, he is hoping that in the next few years, because he has everything right on the grounds of his farm, that it will be. I mean, this is a growing business in the United States, especially since there's no more coming in. So there's this gene pool now within the U.S., and there's more and more independent farmers who are getting into the alpaca business, mostly, again, for the fiber. The fiber is considered a very luxurious material. Yes, probably most people have an alpaca sweater or a scarf, socks. The finer fleece, becomes yarn that goes into clothing. And then you have rugs and accessories and blankets and things like that that come from the coarser yarn. And it's warmer than wool, and it's very lightweight, and it's hypoallergenic. So a lot of people who have allergies, they say, find it not to be irritating.
I wanted to ask you, go back to that ban. It's a ban on the animals themselves, not on the wool.
Right. There's a ban on alpacas, the animals, coming into the country because they felt they had a diverse enough gene pool within the United States, and they wanted to just keep it within the United States and diversify it and make it stronger. There's now 300,000 alpacas within the United States, and that number is expected to grow. When I talked with Kevin, he said that within just Maryland, Virginia, DC area, more and more farmers are sharing with each other. There's communities that people buy either the alpacas themselves or are sharing the product from the alpacas or having them as pets. And he's seen this as definitely a growing trend across the country.
And they're pretty darn cute.
They're pretty darn cute.
Thank you.
All right, so these alpacas, these animals, might be pretty cute, right? But you might not want to get too close to them because alpacas are known to be spitters.
Wow.
But fortunately for us, they don't usually spit at humans. Mostly they spit at other alpacas to establish a pecking order or to express anger.
Wow. Just imagine angry alpacas spitting all over the map. I mean, that would make a perfect video game. What do you think?
Right, kind of like Angry Birds.
Angry
I think it could work, yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of video games, our next story takes us to Pakistan, where a rising gaming industry is breaking gender barriers.
Sharon Bain talked to two startup companies where young men and women are working together to reap the benefits of the massive international video game market. Check it out.
A top-earning mobile phone game can gross more than $3 million a day. Young Pakistani entrepreneurs like Baba Ahmed are hoping to cash in on the money-making trend, while also bringing men and women together in the workplace. An unlikely scenario in conservative Pakistan that Ahmed says is crucial for creative development.
Each person that works on a product adds something of themselves, brings something to the product. And from that angle, diversification is phenomenally important. It really increases the scope and perspective of what you're bringing to the market.
At Pakistani gaming company We Are Play, which both services games and creates them, a younger, educated urban generation is breaking all the norms when it comes to work. Quality assurance technician Maria Khan says We Are Play's young CEO, Mohsin Afzal, treats women as equals.
Because you would see a lot of girls here, and you would see a lot of boys. There are a lot of boys that are working under the girls. And that is because he doesn't see what gender are you from, what age are you from, how much prior experience do you have. As long as you are committed to the work, he would hire you on that thing.
But while the industry has managed to break some barriers at home, it has been harder to penetrate the international business side of gaming.
If I come in and say, we're a Pakistani-based company, absolutely, you lost me at hello. I come and say, hi, I'm a Stanford graduate who has a successful game from here and there. They're listening. I don't even talk about where the company is based. And then when you position it as a company that is low cost, based in Asia, all of a sudden they're like, oh, this is pretty good.
Luckily for both companies, which have produced internationally popular games, the consumer doesn't care where the games come from. They just want to have fun. Sharon Bain, VOA News, Lahore.
And with that, we are set to wrap up another show. And Ron, I have to say, it's so nice to have you back here behind the desk with me again.
Thank you so much. It's great to be back.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. Right. Well, next week, we'll be back again with another new show. And I will be putting on Google Glass to see that brave new world.
That's going to be pretty cool. Can't wait to see that. In the meantime, to see all our episodes of On Assignment, just go to voanews.com, Facebook, or YouTube.
So long, everybody. Take care. Until next time.